Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the second Aging Research at King's Innovation and Commercialization webinar. And this afternoon, it's my great pleasure to welcome Jim Mellon, who is a friend of ARK and well known to many of you, I'm sure. Jim is a prolific writer, author, and also serial entrepreneur. And most recently, his book, Moore's Law, has received critical acclaim, and it's all about the investor's guide to the new agrarian revolution, which Jim will be speaking to us about this afternoon. I'm also delighted to welcome my colleague and the ARK entrepreneur in residence, Svetlana Surudina, who will be joining us in our conversation. And she'll be telling us about her role as an entrepreneur and also an academic researcher here at King's College London. So to start with, I'd really like to welcome Jim to tell us a little bit about what's new through Agronomics, the company that he co-founded on cultured meats and novel food. I'm sure Jim has a lot to tell us about that, and also his company, Juvenescence, which focuses on longevity biotechnologies. And I see these companies going hand in hand, and that's the subject for our discussion this afternoon. So thank you very much again, Jim. Would you like to say hello to the audience?
Yes, well, thank you very much, Richard. Thank you for having me, and Svetlana, lovely to see you. And hi, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be speaking today. You're right, Richard. The two companies, Agronomics and Juvenescence, were sort of born out of the same idea, which is effectively a biotech idea. I've been involved in biotech for quite a while, as you know, Richard. And you know, you're very actively involved in biotech at the sharp end of it. And the Juvenescence is an anti-aging company which has been going for about 3 and a bit years now. Has raised quite a lot of money, so over $250 million of funding, and is probably going to go, well, very likely to go public in this year, so by the end of this year. And the field of anti-aging is a very fraught field, as you know better than anyone, because you may have a great idea, but quite often it doesn't translate from the clinic into practice. And so what we've done is we've spread our risk across about 20 projects, because we don't know really no one else does what's going to work, but we know that something will work. And so Juvenescence is going pretty well. It's got a seasoned team of veteran biotech people who've had a lot of success, and I'm very confident that in the long term it'll be a big contributor to mankind by slowing, halting, reversing, whatever the process of aging, with help from academic institutions such as yours, Richard, and yours, Svetlana. But I know that you're the entrepreneur in residence, but this is the scientific end that I'm talking about. And so that is born out of biotech, and really largely based on the advances made since the unveiling of the human genome about 20 years ago, and the ability to read and discover the pathways of aging and the ability to interfere with them in a positive way. And similarly, the food revolution, which is almost at the top of a lot of people's minds at the moment, is born out of biotech. So the cell cultured meat, dairy, materials space, and fish for that matter, that we're very actively involved in, comes out of biotech processes. These are established processes. They were too expensive to produce food until relatively recently, and now the price is coming down. And the reason my book is called Moore's Law will be very familiar to your audience. It's a riff off Moore's Law, where the price of semiconductors comes down by 50% every 18 months or so, and the efficiency doubles, posited by Gordon Moore now 56 years ago. And it's the same thing for what we're doing and the companies that we invest in this space in food. And I'm just going to make 3 predictions in this area. One is that within 10 years, there will be no dairy farming as we know it left in the world. dairy farming at the moment is associated with cows trotting in to be milked 2 or 3 times a day. It's a pretty cruel process, by the way, in case you're thinking it's sort of bucolic cows on alpine meadows. It's definitely not that. And already plant-based milks are invading that territory, and in the US up to a quarter of the market this year will be plant-based milks, which didn't really exist 10 years ago in any quantity. Plant-based milks are familiar to everyone, you know, oat milk and almond milk, soya, etc. Oatly, which is the Swedish company that makes oat milk, has gone public in the US and now has a valuation of $15 billion as an example. But the reason that the market will be further disrupted beyond just from plant-based is something called precision fermentation. And companies are now developing whey and casein, which are the principal components of milk, outside of the use of cows. And in the next year or two, those products will be on the market. So very soon, yogurts, cheeses, milks, anything that comes from dairy products will be replaced. And that's why I make that prediction. That's prediction number 1. Prediction number 2 is that the meat market will be 50% either plant-based, and everyone knows about Beyond, Impossible, Quorn, meatless farms, etc. But they don't know much about the cell ag meats that are grown in laboratories, started as stem cells that are differentiated into muscle and fat cells and then grown in very large bioreactors. Those cell ag products will be on the market in the next couple of years. And so it's not a major prediction, I don't think, to say that in 10 years' time, half of the world's meat market will be cell ag or plant-based meats, up from a very small percentage at the moment. And then the last prediction is that fish, which I don't know if anyone on this webinar has watched Seaspiracy, but it's a Netflix documentary. I thoroughly recommend it. Overfishing of the oceans, despolation of the seas, use of antibiotics in farmed fish, which now account for more than half of all the fish eaten on the planet. Bycatch, which is a word for basically taking fish which are not used, and including things like dolphins and whales, and sharks, which are killed in their millions every year. Something has to be done about the fishing that is going on at the moment. And just as an example, McDonald's introduced the fillet of fish in the 1960s, and since then they've gone through 6 species of fish. They've all gone extinct as a result of the overfishing of those species. They don't exist anymore. So something has to be done, and my final prediction is that 50% or more of the fish market will be made in laboratories or factories. And one company from California, which we have a close relationship to, will have its first product on the market in the US by the end of this year. So this is happening now. None of these companies are science fiction projects. It's actually happening faster than aging, because to get foods on the market which are non-GM is quicker than trying to get drugs on the market. And the pace of progress is absolutely amazing. So I wrote my book in the lockdown, interviewed 35 key opinion leaders, and all the profits from the book go to the Good Food Institute, which is the leading advocacy group in the world for reducing intensive farming. And the very final point I'll make is that 20% of global emissions come from intensive farming, more than any other form of man-made activity. 80% of antibiotics go into intensively farmed animals. That creates a big pandemic risk should we have a bacterial rather than a viral pandemic. And that 80 billion animals are killed every year for our consumption, along with 2 trillion fish. The numbers are monumental. It's much better for human health, for the world's environment, that we replace that huge amount of intensive farming with something better. And that's what Agronomics, which is a listed company in London, is intending to be a part of. There we are. That's my little summary.
That's wonderful, Jim. Great. I mean, you have really presented to us some revolutionary thoughts, and that's part of the title of your book. And we are in a phase of transition. We're post-Brexit, we're post-pandemic, hopefully very soon for many of us, at least in Europe. And we are thinking in new ways about our own health and wellness, and also what we are eating. To that end, we're being more resilient in what we're choosing to eat for health benefits. And as I said earlier, this is really hand in hand, diet, health, and longevity. And I think what you have put together is a really good and strong concept, how we can eat more healthily, more sustainably, and also impacting on consumer choice. So that is another big hurdle. Are we going to be buying novel foods? What do we need to change our mindset about what meat is, what is on our plate? Bearing in mind our own health and wellness, the components of our food, and also the technology that goes into it. So there is a cost implication, a health implication that really has to be addressed through, as you said, academic and also industry joint endeavors. So with that, I'll hand over to Svetlana, who, as I said, is our new entrepreneur in residence, bridging really the industry and commercialization aspects of medical or biomedical research with commercial opportunities. And we believe this is a way forwards, how we develop stronger partnerships between industry, startups, and also the policymakers, because the governments also need to make a decision on sustainability and how we can change the consumer mindset. So Svetlana, thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. And thank you, Jim, for this fascinating summary of your work. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And also, it's very interesting how it links back to what we at ARK are doing, which is looking at longevity in health from the perspective not curing diseases, but actually going all the way through the human experience. And large part of it is, of course, food. And the question of how we can change people's attitude towards what they eat, what decisions they make is really interesting part of it. And my role, I come from entrepreneurial and technology background, and right now I combine doing the same thing, but within three roles. I'm a PhD researcher at the Department of Informatics at King's College, and I run a software technology company, and recently joined ARK as an entrepreneur in residence, which I think is a fantastic organization, absolutely different from what's everything happening in this space. And you're talking as well, Jim, about the fact that, for example, Juvenescence has a portfolio of 20 companies. And I wanted to ask you, so of course, from investment perspective, it's probably the ones that with highest probability will succeed within the next 10 years, obviously, using all the three trends that you mentioned. But what do you think about the importance of building up an ecosystem, sort of long tail of innovation, and how can that happen, helping the consumer to change their opinion, as it happened with milk? How can we change people's attitudes towards type of meat they eat, or maybe just switching to other alternatives? And how can we bring the larger communities, how we can encourage government and maybe larger networks of investors, institutional, but as well individuals, like how I as an individual can invest into this space or invest into my own health? What do you think about it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's got a multi-part answer, and I'll be as brief as possible. The first thing is that most of these companies that we've invested in have, well, all of them actually have a product, and they've all taste tested it, or in the case of materials like leather or cotton, shown it to the consumers, the ultimate consumers, to see whether they would be happy buying that or eating those products. And there's about a 75% acceptance. I mentioned milk earlier. 10 years ago in the US, the milk market was about 0.5% plant-based. Today, it's nearly 1/4. The trajectory is very obvious. And when I when people, are increasingly eating plant-based meats, there aren't any cell ag meats yet, really, except in Singapore and in Israel for people to eat. But in the pandemic, people have increasingly been trying the Beyonds and the Impossibles and so forth. When the cell ag stuff comes along, it's going to be very interesting, because I think fish will be the easiest to get across. Everyone knows that fish is bad for you if you eat too much of it because of microplastics, toxins, antibiotics, etc. And this fish that comes out of the Blue Nalu company, as an example, is identical both in terms of taste, texture, convenience, cookability, and all that sort of stuff to the regular fish. It just doesn't have any waste. There's no tails, entrails, eyes, scales, or anything like that. So I think it'll be much easier for them to get the message across that fish can be substituted for something that comes out of a lab, because after all, it's identical to the fish that comes out of the sea, except it doesn't have the harmful stuff in it. In terms of meat, I think it's going to be an education process, and it will take longer. But the first and easiest market for us to address is what's called ground beef. And ground beef is stuff that goes into sausages or pasties or burgers, which has no real structure to it. It's not like a steak or a lamb chop or something like that. And that will be, I think, easier for consumers to accept. And that also constitutes 60% of the US market for meat and about 50% of the European market for meat. So I think that'll be the first area to go. But I just want to, your question is very good, but I want to get across to the audience, what is cell ag meat? It's not GM, it's not Frankenstein type meats. It's where you go and you take a sample from a living animal. Let's say it's a cow. The cow doesn't even feel it, and the sample is about the size of my little fingernail, 2.5 milliliters. From that sample, you extract, which your audience will be very familiar with, stem cells. You differentiate those stem cells into the ones that you want, which are typically muscle and fat, but you might have connective tissue as well. You grow those stem cells in separate bioreactors, which again will be very familiar to the King's people on this webinar. And after about 40 days, you harvest them. Then, having been fed with what's called a media, which is basically the same things that animals would extract from plants if they were eating on a feedlot, or if they were very lucky eating outside, and using growth hormones, which are becoming increasingly cheap as the scale up occurs in their manufacture. The product that comes out is identical to the best in species of meat because it is meat. And so just in terms of economics, my little fingernail's worth of a sample, which, by the way, in the future may not be needed because they use induced pluripotent stem cells, which will be immortalized so that you won't need to go back to the animal. My little fingernail will produce about 3,000 kilos of meat in 40 days, which is the equivalent to 7 or 8 cows or cattle. And those cattle would take 28 months to grow in their feedlot and go through some pretty bad stuff. My meat that comes out has no hormones, no antibiotics, no waste. It doesn't have any bacteria. So when it's packed, its shelf life is much longer, and it doesn't cause food contamination. And if anyone thinks food contamination is not a big issue, it is in the United States in particular, because of the practices in slaughterhouses and the contamination of the meats. 1 in 6 people in the US every year has to go to seek emergency treatment, medical treatment, because of food poisoning. You won't get that with this product. So it will have great resonance with particularly younger consumers. It's very good for the environment. It removes animal cruelty. It removes antibiotics from the food supply chain. It can be produced at the point of consumption. So places like the UK, which import half of their food, will be able to be self-sufficient in proteins. It uses a fraction of the water that growing animals does, and it doesn't involve the chopping down of the Amazon rainforest to grow soya beans to go into cows or into chickens or into any other form of animal that we eat. which are very inefficient converters of plant protein into animal protein. A cow takes in 25 times more than it puts out. A chicken is about 9 times more. These products will be about 2.5 times more at scale of inputs versus output. I mean, this is a no-brainer unless you're a cattleman in the United States. Deathly silence. You're all muted.
Right, just trying to connect into the conversation. So it's really interesting you mentioned the process. Absolutely, I think it's very clear the advantages for humanity, for individuals. But then you briefly referenced the old world lobby of beef farmers. And in one of your previous talks, you mentioned that it's really important to engage organizations like retailers and the likes of Unilever and Nestle to really bring the mass adoption to the levels that's required to completely change the consumption patterns. So in terms of strategy of engaging those companies, what would be your recommendation? And the reason why I'm asking, because one of the directions that we actively develop at ARK is actually a partnership with this type of companies that really at the cutting edge of influencing people's decision or really helping them to select foods. And we really need to change their participation in this process in order for the end user to make better and healthier choices as well.
Yeah, that's another good question. So basically, Nestle last week, I think it was a leaked memo, but something came out of their boardroom that said that 80% of their food was bad for human beings, basically, and they need to do something to change. You're quite right, Svetlana. So I think these companies will be anxious to both gain the economic opportunity and also to improve the consumer perception of the stuff that they sell. This will be helped, I think, by governments and not necessarily consciously doing it for the sake of improving human consumption of foods, but because of carbon emissions. So we are in the year, as we all know, of COP26. The G7 is meeting at the moment. They're all making pronouncements about how they're going to reduce emissions around the world. I think it's a pretty big deal. It's a good thing. One of the key things that I think will happen is that carbon taxes will become a much bigger feature of for polluting companies. And there's no bigger polluter, as I mentioned earlier on, than intensive farming. So what will happen, in my opinion, is that these big food producers like JBS out of Brazil, a beef producer, or Cargill or Tyson out of the United States, will end up paying carbon taxes. The alternative food producers, the ones that are making the good stuff, will be the beneficiary of carbon credits. That provides a very nice price umbrella for these companies to grow, and I think this will be a very important element to their growth. So governments, almost inadvertently, will push this forward. I want to just make consumers do change their habits. I mean, let's look at smoking. All right, in the 1950s, I think 70% of men, Rich, you probably know better than me, 70% of men in the UK were smokers. I don't think the figure's much more than 10% now. Consumers have realized that smoking is bad for you. Similarly, eating processed and red meat is very bad for you. In Glasgow, I went to Glasgow University to talk to them, and I'm sure it's the same in London. In a 10-kilometer radius, there's a 30-year longevity gap between the richer area and the poorer area, and it's not because the poor guys are fighting or drinking or smoking all the time. It's because they're eating processed meat every single day, and they end up with colon cancer, and that is responsible for the 33-year age gap in life expectancy, which is an absolute disgrace, and that comes directly out of the meat industry. Highly processed meats that you buy in, well, I won't mention anything, but in the leading fast food chains. It needs to change, and I think that there's a sufficient realization amongst consumers that as soon as this stuff is on the market, they're going to buy it. Richard's muted again.
So let me come in. I'm not muted anymore. Thank you very much, Jim. You made some really important points there. Maybe you mentioned several times colleagues from King's College on this call who might have cell biology expertise, predominantly in the biotherapeutics area, stem cell biology and so on, maybe not geared towards cultured meats. But it's a really important point, how we can repurpose academic expertise towards the cell biology that is required for novel foods, whether it's meat or seafood and so on. The technologies that we have in-house would be really important for us to learn from each other, how we might learn from the food industry, the novel food industry, the technologies that can be repurposed towards biomedical sciences. You mentioned very importantly the use of antibiotics and other hormones perhaps in your processes that would be reduced. And we are also doing the same in our stem cell technologies, where we're reducing the use of products so that we can be more efficient in our cell biology, which is equally important for what you are doing. So that brings me on to how industries such as your companies and the food industry can better integrate with academia. And as you may know, Aging Research at King's has a strong partnership with Unilever, and Unilever have an innovation hub at King's College. And clearly they go hand in hand. We are working with them on healthy aging and longevity, including stem cell biology, and how we can repurpose what we're doing with the medical community and also the consumer goods community, together with the novel agri-foods. I think that's really exciting way forwards. And we are also considering how we can build together a longevity academic industry ecosystem, a kind of longevity Silicon Valley, if you will. And I'd just like to get some of your thoughts on how, in your mind, we might better integrate our two aligned strengths, how we can learn from industry and how our academic expertise, albeit from the biomedical perspective, can benefit your new industries.
Great point, Richard. So, look, bring it on. I mean, basically, Juvenescence is a company which essentially backs scientists, entrepreneurs, many of them from research institutions, and gives them money to take their projects forward in a corporate structure with guidance. Agronomics has started off by investing in existing companies, and those existing companies are typically more advanced than the ones that Juvenescence has invested in. So as a result, Agronomics gets a smaller share of the company. We're very, very keen on working out ways that we can cooperate with leading institutions such as King's to create new companies in what I call white space. White space is an area of food technology or materials technology. And bear in mind that this new technology can produce not just foods, but also materials like leather, cotton, threads, collagen, etc. We're very keen to back scientists, entrepreneurs who work in leading academic institutions such as yours to create corporate vehicles. We're working on one such project at the moment. It's not with King's, but it doesn't mean that we wouldn't like to do another 10 more. And it's also very important for us that as a British company that we do more in the UK. And you know, most of the technologies that we're talking about at the moment come from, you guessed it, California, but there's also quite a cluster in the Netherlands and in Israel, and there's a couple of companies in Singapore. But frankly speaking, the UK, which has one of the strong, if not the strongest science background per capita in the world, is not being properly represented. We would love to talk to you. And any other scientist entrepreneurs who have a great idea, and possibly more than an idea, because we're actually looking for something that's a little bit further advanced than just an idea, to talk about doing corporate structures. So as I said at the beginning, bring it on, Richard. We'd love to work with you guys.
Excellent. If I just may come in, that was exactly as well one of my questions. And in particular, one of the areas that we work on at ARK is helping the industry academic partnerships to prosper. And what I in particular was really kind of joining the dots when I was following your investment advice and on the shows like Master Investor, which I always think very fascinating. And you mentioned these 3 principles of investment when you choose a company for investment and development is in addition to large potential market, it's a strong team, which of course has to include a science expert. Someone comes from research background, as I assume. It's also about having a strong AP, which presumably in many cases would be, as you say, be developed at a university or at some kind of research institution. At the same time, for me, as someone who comes almost from outside, from kind of the industry or real world to academia, for me, I'm always a little bit struggle with the fact how difficult it is in the traditional world to go through all the commercialization processes that the colleges or universities impose, and we're really trying to change that, simplifying, streamlining this process. And from your perspective, what was your experience? What do you think we need to do to help this being easier, faster process, helping someone like yourself, investors, to discover new promising research, new technologies, innovators who really want to go and apply their skills in commercial world?
Yeah, well, you know, I've had some real first-hand experience of, not with King's, but with you know, a couple of other universities, of the sludginess of the process. You know, it's really, really difficult, and it's hard for the people in the universities who develop products or want to develop products to deal with their licensing departments and to get their heads around what the requirements are. I think it's really important to distinguish between the biotech deals that are done, you know, where there's a sort of template. I mean, I suppose OSI would be the leading template in the UK, but I'm sure there are plenty of others out there, where the end product has a very high price attached to it. So, you know, if you develop a drug that's successful, you can, and that people do charge high prices for that end product. You know, they always say that the first pill costs $1 billion to make, and then every pill thereafter costs 1 cent. So companies can be relatively generous in terms of giving royalties to universities and academic institutions. But in food, it's a very different matter. I mean, food is a very, very cut price commodity type business. And the universities, such as King's, will have to get their heads around the fact that any royalties or any, you know, payments that they get for the use of their technology will have to be key to the fact that the product is a much, much lower price product. And that's something that I think that, you know, Svetlana, as, you know, the entrepreneur in residence, need to get across if we're going to be able to do collaborations effectively with King's and other institutions. It may just be that the best way of getting rewarded is, rather than royalties and milestones and all that sort of stuff, is just to own a share of the underlying company and have an equity share in it. I think that's probably the easiest way of doing it, because no one really knows what the ultimate price of a food product will be. But you know that at the moment, the burgers that are produced in cellular agriculture are about $9, and in Tesco you can buy a conventional burger for 50 cents. So the tipping point won't be reached before they get down to $1 or less. So price is a really important issue for the average consumer, and it's the one that, you know, that's why it's called Moore's Law. We need to get the prices down, and we can't get it down if the research institutions are saying, oh, we want a 10% royalty, we want this or that. So this is just a point that I'm making. If there's anyone in your licensing department that's listening, please listen carefully on that one.
Jim, you make a really good point about the bureaucracy that's involved when we when companies like yourselves and other large corporates deal with universities. That's why we're thinking about a new model, a novel way in which we can engage, and what shape of a academic industry hub looks like, how we can overcome some of these hurdles, because as you say, it is a no-brainer. One concept that we had been considering is a hybrid, maybe a venture philanthropy model, whereby both sides can have a share of the pie, and also to engage the right corporates as well. You mentioned about the importance of consumer education. Coming back to the health context, smoking, clear example, but healthy eating, everyone is thinking about it, it's not new. But with novel foods, people will be concerned about the health consequences, the health benefits of eating this food, and how we can better inform the consumer about the benefits. How can we tackle, or how can we even track health benefits at the consumer level? What kind of tests do we want to do? What is accessible to the consumer at low cost to show that these products or a healthy lifestyle is leading to our healthy longevity? So do you have any thoughts on that from the Juvenescence perspective, perhaps? Supplements, how do we know the supplements are making a difference? There are many claims made on the side of a bottle, but what biomarkers can be measured in our home environment? Everyone is now used to doing tests, you know, the lateral flow tests, the PCR tests. Everyone has, you know, they're used to tests at home, routine tests. What can we do to test our healthy longevity?
Yeah, good point. In Juvenescence, as you know, Richard, has a consumer division, which is a sort of unusual thing for a company of its type. And it's got its first product on the market in the United States now, which is a ketone ester that comes out of the Buck Institute that you're very familiar with. It's relatively easy to test its efficacy because you can use a ketone meter to determine whether or not you're in ketosis. And this product does work. It tastes absolutely horrible, and they're trying to improve the taste. I actually have 3 bottles here, and I regard it as a bit of a trial to drink one of them. You'd have to find a way of throwing it to the back of your throat. But it does put you into a state of ketosis, and as you know better than I do, ketosis is generally a good thing, and it is likely that you'll, you know, if you need to lose weight, you'll lose 5 to 10% of your body weight in a year as a result of drinking this product. So I think that's a great thing. Next product is going to be spermidine, which you're familiar with as well, improving mitochondrial health. And then there's a couple of other products that are going to be coming along afterwards. And I think this is really important for us because what it's showing is that these are FDA approved products, but they're direct to consumer because they're grass. They're made generally recognized as safe ingredients. But they come out of scientific institutions that have, you know, they're not just made up sort of potions, you know, with a false, not a false, but a sort of vague label on them. These are very specific products. And I think it's very important for the world as it begins to get a grip on the fact that anti-aging stuff is going to work, and it's going to be a very key component of our lives going forward. That the consumers have already recognized that there are some things they can do now before the drugs are available and the other therapies are available to improve their health, and that Juvenescence is making a big fuss about that. And also it's got a division called JuveU, where you put in your readings, your ketone readings, or any other readings you want to do into an app, which will then guide you towards further improvements in your healthy eating and healthy lifestyle. And that's in its beta development at the moment, but it's going to be widely available next year, and it's super exciting in conjunction with the consumer product. And we hired the former head of Weight Watchers in the US and the head of Vitamin Shop, because they know how to get this stuff across to the consumer. And so, as I said, we've got 1 product on the market already, but it's really important. And if you know, King's has got a great product, I'll put you in touch with the relevant people, because we just want a big product pipeline that is attractive to consumers, but comes out of respected research institutions and has efficacy beyond any other product on the market.
Sure, that's really important, Jim. I really appreciate your offer and also the comments. Coming back to how we can sway the consumers into taking on board new products, supplements, and so on, and maybe also to address some of the questions in the Q&A. So thank you to the audience for posting this. Please do continue. Is this concept of healthy eating, healthy lifestyles? Should we change our diet? We know we should. Should we buy new foods, or should we take supplements? How can we roll that into one? Through government policy. Government policy led to fortification of bread and wheat and flour, putting chlorine and fluorine in the drinking water and so on. That has made a huge health benefit across the society and population. So that's a really important way forwards. What can we do as we are designing novel technologies to build or to formulate foods that are healthier, more sustainable, how we can convince the consumer that this is going to make a difference. So one of the questions related to epigenetic clocks and to measure aging. Does a change in diet and lifestyle cause us to have a slower rate of aging? Can it reverse some aspects of age-related decline? What technologies do we need to build into novel foods, novel measurement biotechnologies, so that it is accessible at the supermarket level? You don't need to go into a pharmacy or GP clinic to get tested. And how we can bring on board the large multinational consumer goods companies, like we mentioned, Nestle and Unilever, to invest in this kind of area. So all of that is really important with policy makers as well, how the government can be convinced to facilitate this. And as you know, ARK is a partner of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Longevity, where we are making very good headway to influence government policy. And it's also through education of the policymakers. As a university, we educate undergraduates, postgraduates, but do we need to educate the consumer in general? So these are just some thoughts that, again, I would appreciate your views on. It's great that you've written the books, but at the shelf, at the supermarket shelf, what can we do to influence the consumer?
Well, I mentioned earlier on carbon taxes. You know, I think the reduction in smoking, as an example, has occurred in some big part by the just how expensive it is now compared to presumably how it used to be, and we need to make unhealthy foods much more expensive. That's my view, anyway. I mean, there'll be a lot of libertarians who would say it's disgraceful, etc., etc. But frankly speaking, these foods are killing people. They're causing an epidemic of obesity and diabetes. And it's terrible in children that you actually see in the UK now, how many of them are obese because their parents are feeding them the wrong stuff. And it's not the case that, you know, good food has to be expensive. It's just not true. It's that these, you know, fatty and bad foods are widely available and advertised very heavily, and I think they need to be made more expensive. I think that's one element of government policy that I think needs to change. Now, the alternatives, which are the alternative proteins, are coming down in price to being equivalent to conventional foods. So it's not like you can't buy an Impossible Burger at anything other than a ridiculous price. They're basically the same price now, more or less, as the as conventional burgers, and they're so much, well, they are much better for you, and they're much better for the planet. But so number one, taxation. Number two, the novel foods that we're talking about here, Richard, can be engineered to have healthy stuff in them, whereas you can't do that with conventional meats and fish. And they don't have the bad stuff in them. So encouragement of a homegrown industry to produce that, which would also reduce our dependence on overseas imports of food. Half of the food in the UK is imported, as an example. In the Middle East, it's 95%. In Singapore, it's 90%. So there are pockets of food insecurity around the world that are really need this, including the UK. And number three, this is an opportunity to create a brand new industry with lots of jobs and high value jobs that's just waiting for us in the UK to take advantage of. And why aren't we doing it? So you, with the APGG, or is it APPG? I can't remember what, the very important organization that you're partnered with. Those are 3 points I think that you could make, and you get a lot of applause and support from me.
That's great, Jim. Thank you for that. One of the questions, and again, we are addressing this through the APPG, is disparities between those who can afford supplements and higher cost foods and accessibility to those who can't. And this has come to the forefront through the pandemic. We need to make novel foods, supplements accessible to the whole population. At the moment, perhaps your business models are to charge a premium to get through the R&D and the development so that this can be made accessible to all. And this brings me on to the concept of financial longevity as well. We have physical health, mental health, but financial health brings on stress and uncertainty. So one of the basic areas is what we can afford at the supermarket. And this is a really important concept that we are discussing through the APPG for longevity, how we can have health for all, equality, accessibility, and also education. So I think these are really important areas to tackle over the next few years so that we are making an impact across society, not only those who can afford it. And the concept of financial longevity and how we can integrate perhaps the fintech sector into health tech and beyond. I think that's really important for accessibility to these novel foods. Just wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think that all of that stuff needs to happen. It will happen. It just takes longer than your fertile mind would like it to happen today because you can envisage it, but the implementation takes longer. There's also an inertia among consumers that, moving banks, for instance, the reason that big banks like to get students when they're students is because most of them stay there for life. They just really can't be bothered to change. I think that's changing with fintech, but I completely agree with you that the supplements should be made available, I don't know, free, but at least a lot cheaper to the broad population, because if, as we now have, 10% of the population has diabetes, and that percentage will rise, I would imagine, the cost of those people being treated for diabetes outweighs any cost implications of handing out good supplements to people to avoid them getting diabetes, and into educating them into eating more healthily and encouraging them to read up on why they should do that for the sake of themselves, their family, and so forth. So I think your point is great. Again, yes, Richard, it's a great point. Good supplements available for anyone who wants them.
That's great. Thank you, Jim. Maybe I can hand back to Svetlana to give us some thoughts on how, as an entrepreneur in an academic institution, you can facilitate some of these thoughts that we engage with industries, not only the large consumer goods companies, but also startups that we can incorporate into our own ecosystem.
Absolutely. So, of course, there's so many areas that we can discuss, and we covered already, I think, so much with all of them being important. I guess because we have just a few minutes left, I will take advantage and mention my favorite topic and my favorite instrument for bringing together academy and industry and making sure we progress in not only creating new commercial product, but really building up a society where prevention and conscious consumption really dominate, which is technology and data, and how we can potentially use AI and systems built around human that make decision to amplify the impact. And in particular, Jim, I wanted to ask you about your thoughts about what is the role in data. I mean, you mentioned previously UK Biobank. Of course, you invested in many companies such as in Silico who use AI to build better health, better anti-aging products. But of course, I guess it's a little bit tricky because it's harder to put an IP protection on software or data for it to really work. It needs to connect communities rather to create another silo and create another machine learning tool that sits somewhere isolated. So what is your thought? What are your thoughts on the role of the technologies and how can we use them better? And of course, in a safe manner, considering there's all dangers of, say, biased AI for creating more inequality. What's your approach, I guess, in investment, but also strategically for the society? And you are on mute.
Can someone unmute Jim?
I think actually everyone went on mute. Strange.
I'm not on mute. Am I on mute?
Jim, you're looking for unmute, which will be towards the top right of your screen, I think.
Nope.
Yeah.
Now you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, well, that was probably me trying to avoid the question. No, there was you enunciated it very well, Svetlana. I can't improve on that. I think that AI is going to be extremely important. We have, as you rightly point out, an investment in Silico. We also have our own in-house one called Relation. And we are working with this with our subsidiary JuveU to try and improve the consumer experience and to agglomerate that data for the benefit of everyone, really. I'd be very happy to put you in touch with JuveU. I think you'd be they'd be a much more they know much more than I do about how to discuss things with you on that subject. But I do think it's all going to be extremely important. And of course, this is an area that the UK is really strong in. The fact is that I guess you guys have had your vaccinations. I've had my second one quite recently, and now you have on your app effectively a vaccine passport. That is made possible by the fact that the computer systems of the NHS are unparalleled really anywhere else in the world. So it's a big British plus. We should use that to improve data on health generally, and I hope that that's going to happen without people being worried that their individual data is going to be used inappropriately, but I'm sure there are ways around that. So Svetlana, I'm happy to put you in touch with the JuveU people. I think you'd have a great and fertile discussion with them.
Brilliant, thank you, Jim.
That's great. Maybe I can finish off. We have a few more minutes, maybe to tackle one or two of the questions. Thank you very much again for posting them. But coming back to the concept of the global community, now with Teams and Zoom and so on, we are all very close to each other. We are a global community. We are all facing the pandemic together, but still there are regional differences in culture, dietary preferences, and as we all know, the pandemic has struck each person very differently. So personalized food and nutrition, personalized responses to therapeutics. So taking this very big question together, how we can build the world together through different regions, through education programs, even through the longevity forum that you had put together a few years ago. That was a brilliant idea to bring the stakeholders together to better educate the world. How we can utilize forums such as this webinar, the Longevity Forum, the APPG for longevity, and as I mentioned earlier, the supermarket at the shelf, at the consumer interface. How we can bring all of this together to make headway. the next decade of novel foods, of healthy longevity, is really through education, and it's through incentives. Why do we want to be healthier? Why do we want to be happier? And what this means in different societies. At the moment, I have some engagement with some countries in the Middle East where they are actively embracing the concept of happiness. And I think we all want to be happy. So on that note of or wanting to be happier, healthier, maybe I can ask you to sum up with some comments just to build all of that together, Jim.
Well, Richard, you put it absolutely brilliantly. I can't really improve on that. I mean, who doesn't want to be happier? Who doesn't want to be able to live more years in a healthy rather than a decrepit condition, which I know what is ARK's principal mission. And who doesn't want to be able to eat in a way that doesn't cause the mass slaughter of animals in a very cruel fashion, and also the degradation of our environment, which we know is under severe threat. All of those things, you're absolutely right, depend on educational forums. We, that is ARK, the Longevity Forum, and everyone else who's part of the Brotherhood, or I suppose Brotherhood is the right way of putting it, because I think that's appropriate. It's a worldwide thing. Brotherhood of people who believe in this vision need to do everything we can to collaborate. And I know that ARK is being part of Longevity Week, along with the Longevity Forum. We'll do as many of these things as we can until the message is out there and the good things are happening. So thank you very much for having me, both of you, today. I've really enjoyed it. Great questions, and look forward to seeing you both very soon, possibly in person even.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, Jim. It's great to have you join us today, and also thank you very much for kindly agreeing to join our external advisory board. So we'll have many, many more wonderful conversations in person. And I'd also like to thank, of course, Svetlana for joining us and contributing to the new advanced concepts that we're developing at ARK through entrepreneurship, innovation, and commercialization. And finally, to thank the audience for joining us today, and to those of you who will be listening to the recording as well. It's great to have you on board. Thank you very much for your questions, and we will get back in touch with you about our next commercialization and innovation webinar, which will be in a few months' time after the summer. So with that, thank you very much again, Jim, Svetlana, and those of you who are watching.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
guys. Thank you.